Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another edition of the Geo Interview, where we decode the most pressing issues shaping our world through a strategic lens. Today's edition takes us deep into the heart of South Asia's power play through the lens of ancient Indian strategic wisdom. The topic of today's discussion is the Kautilya Mandala, decoding India's neighborhood geopolitics. To help us unravel these complex layers, we are honored to be joined by Professor V. Yoga Jyotsna, an esteemed academic and geopolitical thinker. Professor Jyotsna is the former Dean of Social Sciences at Osmania University and Amity University, and also served as an Honorary Adjunct Fellow at the National Maritime Foundation. Her deep insights into India's foreign policy and strategic outlook make her the perfect guide for this conversation. How are you doing, ma'am?
Very well. Thank you for those very high-sounding intros.
To know, ma'am. Now, before we begin, may I invite you to share your opening remarks and any initial thoughts that you have on the relevance of today's theme?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question to begin with. At the outset, I wish to thank the team GEOSTRATA for this opportunity. Congratulations to all of you. Everybody appears to be a youngster, 2, 3 generations removed from my generation. I appreciate your efforts, honestly. Now, to begin with, how do we look at this entire region through the prism of Kautilya? Kautilya was definitely a visionary, there's no doubt about that, and he had ample suggestions for every form of governance, though he was advising the king in a monarchical system. He was not ignoring the possibility of a democratic setup, and he had his share of advice for every form of government. Today, to apply Kautilya's wisdom to our region and our kind of situation is to jump centuries, to be very honest. The Kautilya's text was discovered way back in 1910, but it was written centuries ago, and the wisdom of that era has much relevance today, but not in toto. Today, it's an era where cooperation and co-working appears to be a guidepost for many of the nations that are likely to get stuck in a conflictual position in several dimensions, not just political or strategic. It could be economic, it could be technological, it could be purely security related, it could be on n number of dimensions. So we have to wade through the contemporary situation quite differently. Yeah.
Thank you for those insightful opening reflections, Professor. Now let's move on with our Q&A part. And let's begin with India's contemporary outreach policy, that is the Neighbourhood First initiative. Now, my first question would be that given the evolving geopolitical landscape in South Asia, how do you assess India's initiatives in executing this policy of neighborhood first? And most importantly, how have the neighboring nations, do you think, have reciprocated to this proactive engagement that India has shown? So, what will be your thoughts on that?
First of all, I would like your viewers to understand that we are talking in the context of a given scenario. And that given scenario includes not just the neighbors who share the borders with us, but a larger than life country called China. The People's Republic of China and its ambitions and its power play and its ruthlessness, if I may use the term, has to be taken cognizance of while we are planning for a policy towards the neighborhood as India. The Bharat that we are talking about today is a rising power, is rising economically, Nobody expected this country that has been colonized for more than 1500 years to rise and resurrect itself and reach the fourth position in the economic order or hierarchy of the world. Now, one must take a look at the latest white paper on China's security released. The translated version has been released only a few weeks ago. It was published in Mandarin. The government of China, I don't think, has released an English translation. As usual, one of the American scholars has done so. And it clearly mentions that China will not like interference in the affairs of Tibet. It does not allow anybody to interfere in the affairs of Taiwan. Taiwan is an integral part. Tibet is an integral part. And then it has closely coordinated working relations with Indonesia and Pakistan in the neighborhood of India, but not with India. It mentions 14 countries with which it has signed the boundary settlement agreements. It does not include India. There lies the catch. And this China, with such ambitions and technological and military capability, but when I say military capability, I must add for your viewers' benefit, this country has not fought a war in several decades. So its armed forces are not battle trained or battle experienced, whereas the Indian armed forces have been. That's a difference between Indian armed forces and the Chinese armed forces. While keeping that in mind, how do we look at our neighborhood and how is China looking at our neighborhood? Two pointers must be mentioned here. One is Xi Jinping, the current leader of China, has come to power in 2012. And he has captured the imagination of the Communist Party, his nation, as well as the world since coming to power. He has been one of the most assertive leaders in the recent years. Probably Vladimir Putin comes close to his assertion, internally speaking. Then he has driven China by about 2019, say roughly 5 to 6 years, to be the largest creditor nation in the world. The creditworthiness of China is larger than the combined creditworthiness of World Bank, IMF, the G7 countries, blah, blah. Everybody is a lender, but the combined sum of these loaners is what is being given by China. So that is the economic capability of China. Given this information, the Chinese, like everywhere else in the world, have given our neighbor plenty of amounts. They have deep pockets, and every country has benefited from Chinese money. India was in no position to match. India's competition begins, I think, in the second term of Mr. Modi, because before that, Indian economy could not afford this. We wanted to establish connectivity. We wanted to establish highways and roadways and share hydroelectric projects and then do collaborative marketing and then exchange of goods and manufacturing goods, facilitation via road connectivities, because once upon a time, this was British administered. Then the countries in the neighborhood started becoming independent one after another. And then this bifurcation of the original Bharat that extended all the way up to Afghanistan and Myanmar is a deliberate ploy of history or history makers, in this particular case, Britain. And the same Britain is responsible for the differences of perceptions and approaches between India and China. Now, neighboring countries, some of the pragmatic politicians in those countries have utilized this background to play China against India and India against China. So whenever governments change in those so-called democracies, in quotations, the governments play India against China, and of late they are able to do so. But they are beginning to realize the geographical imperatives of dealing with India as a primary first responder rather than with a faraway China. Can I go on this particular question for a little more?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Yeah. The issue is everybody talks about India should reach out, India should be in a position to talk about, investing in the neighborhood and then supporting the governments and then help them do this, help them do that. But when it comes to the brass tacks of the issues, what happens is India doesn't have, or till recently did not have, pockets that are deep enough to engage on the level and scale of China. There is yet another problem which many analysts have pointed out, and I unfortunately have to concur with that, and that is the nature of delaying projects that India takes up within the country or outside the country. That's why I'm very grateful to uh, whoever is responsible for appointing Mr. Gadkari as the minister for completing roads and connectivity projects in India, because he works like, as one analyst said, like an alien without stopping. He's unstoppable. And that is the kind of a project management that we are required to do in the neighborhood, but we have not been successful. This is a complaint of most of the governments in the neighborhood that have been hoping to collaborate with us. And we blame China. Some of the analysts within India also blame China for taking away our projects. I want to share one little information with the viewers. The port of Hambantota. Hambantota port has been, the place has been represented by Mahinda Rajapaksa's father. So it's been a family affair for more than 40, 50 years. He wanted a port to be developed as opposed to the Colombo port in Sri Lanka. The father could not succeed because the early project in the 70s or 80s was given to a Canadian firm. And the Canadians, for reasons better known to them, delayed the assessment report. As a result, India then wanted to salvage the situation and help the Lankans. Very often in the publications of Indian analysts, the issue comes out as India taking away, India not responding in time, and China had taken away the Hambantota port. The Chinese have deep pockets. Don't ever forget this issue. And it is the Rajapaksa family that benefited immensely from those pockets, and the backlash, the Aragalaya movement in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, before the elections and the coming to the power of the leftist leader, the current dispensation in Sri Lanka, is an example of that deep pockets creating rift and divisions within the Lankan society. So the neighbors are at fault to a certain extent, but not completely, nor is India at fault. India does its best. Like every other country, our bureaucracy is also divided. Some people have a better way of looking at the neighborhood, some don't. Much depends on the leadership. So, having given the Hambantota example, I will say that the neighbors have been, some of them have been very cautious, some of them have been out and out anti-India, like the Maldives. All of us are aware, like the Maldives, they have learned, the neighbors have learned the lessons. The Nepalese tried to do this for a while, depending on which Chinese official was assisting them in their anti-India propaganda and machinations, whereas After the example of Maldives, I think the South Asian neighbors of India have learned that they better deal with India not, rather than with. Also, another additional information is we have been extraordinarily successful in our HADR operations, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. From Iran, along with Indian students, it is India that brought the Lankans on board. Maybe a couple of Nepalese were also involved, I'm not too sure. But then a plane load of Lankans came along with Indians from Iran while the conflict began last week. So the neighborhood has been looking at India and has been hoping to work on various projects that would help their development, but hasn't been very uh, pragmatic in looking at India from a pragmatic approach. This is my comment about the Neighbourhood First policy.
Absolutely, ma'am. I think when you gave the example of the HADR operations, it also highlights that India has been doing and has been maintaining its efforts in developing trust and credibility within the neighbors as well. And throughout your answer, I think it certainly highlights that there is a fine balance that India has to maintain between leadership and accommodation in the region. And I think that would be a great answer to our efforts.
Thank
Now, moving to a more volatile equation, that is India and Pakistan, we've seen that the recent escalations have once again brought the spotlight on the fragility of our bilateral relations. Now, with that being our context, my question would be that what strategies do you think India should implement to respond to a Pakistan that has been terror harboring? And how can India formulate a long term policy that just doesn't react on provocations, but rather also crafts a stable and a firm framework with regards to Pakistan and its bilateral ties?
you. This is a very tough question. One, none of the news channels these days, despite their tall claims, are in a position to give real time news. It's the governments that are holding on to information. And in the case of poor Pakistan, I've had the pleasure of visiting that country twice, but way back in 1990s. But the poor Pakistani, the average Pakistani, gets a terribly filtered, nuanced, and what he ought to be listening kind of a news rather than what is happening news. I'm making a distinction between these two. Despite social media, despite all the availability of information and the high flow of information across the spectrum these days, the average Pakistani is not privy to the correct news. According to Pakistanis, every war was won by Pakistan. I will stop there because that is the fake narrative that keeps going on. You hear a different story from Pakistanis living in Canada or in Europe or in private channels or in YouTube videos, but the average Pakistani living within the country who doesn't have access to social networks, who can't travel out of the country, has no way of knowing the truth about their country and their generals. They have a huge ambition in their armed forces, luxurious lifestyles, and not commensurate to the kind of economic hardships that country goes through. I'll give you one example and then move on to how we need to treat Pakistan that is so very bad in its conduct with its neighbors. Our population is 1.4 billion. We are at 140. Their debt is at 130 billions. This is the only comparison that I can think of between India and Pakistan. After 1975, we have moved ahead, and fortunately for India, different leaders at different phases of Indian history, contemporary history, in the last 30 to 40 years, have moved the country forward against several odds. And our technological achievements are in the backdrop of extraordinary secrecy. We have had our share of Jaichans, as they say in history classrooms. The internal security challenges of India are also extraordinary. We've not, as if it was a cakewalk for India to reach this current position. We still have to face several internal challenges. The Breaking India forces are very much active in this country. It takes hell of a lot of effort on the part of Ministry of Home Affairs to take charge of these fellows. Okay, having said that, how do you handle Pakistan? My answer is, in generic terms, I'm not privy to the strategic formulations of this country. I'm a student. I'm outside the government. I'm out, and I'm a retired person. I'm a student. I keep learning from whatever information is available. From that which I have gleaned through, technologically, you need to be up to date in this country and adapt it for military modernization and military technology. In the era of, people use the term disruptive technologies, I prefer using the term as transformative technologies. In the era of, I'm sure most of your viewers are privy to the information like the importance of lithium-based batteries for electronic vehicles and smart machinery. Now that lithium is part of the rare earth elements, and rare earth elements are a resource that drives future economies, and the world is combating with one another for access to those resources. Okay, Pakistan has its share of rare earth elements. It could catapult itself into a technological power or an economic superpower by utilizing these materials. But it is not interested. It is not bothered. It is bothered only, it is not even bothered when China treats us like a vassal state. It's a colony of China, unfortunately. But the awakened Pakistanis are trying to tell the Chinese that they are not welcome in their country, especially in the Punjab region, in the Gwadar port activities. Many Chinese have been attacked. The Chinese are unhappy, and the Pakistanis are also unhappy with the Chinese, but it doesn't come out into the open. When it comes to India handling Pakistan, we need to keep our military up to date and well trained, and then absolutely prepared. The kind of delays in deliveries that HAL indulges in will not work for a country that is challenged from all corners of the neighborhood like India. So we need to act militarily, politically, economically, and technologically. You can't be lying low or taking it easy or delay projects when it comes to preparedness on these lines. And when it comes to dealing with Pakistan, once again, soft nature or nice conversations or dropping by at a grandchild's wedding or birthday parties, which the Prime Minister has tried, or inviting the leadership to swearing in ceremonies is not going to work. They are not ready to accept it. Plus, so long as the Pakistani military finds it economically beneficial to keep the K term burning, if Kashmir issue is settled, the Pakistani military loses its relevance. They are afraid of that. If anybody digs into the properties of the Pakistani armed forces, it's an eye-opening statement because they own properties in Europe. They own properties running into huge amounts in with their actual salaries, it's an impossibility. I can go on, but what India needs to do is be prepared and be ever vigilant vis-a-vis Pakistan because you simply cannot trust. You cannot trade with an untrustworthy partner. You can't consider them as partners because you've done everything in the old style of diplomacy book to do and meet them halfway through. Nothing works with them because their insatiable appetite to take revenge on India for 1971 is a part of their DNA now, and it is economically and financially beneficial for them. So they are not trustworthy. Keep them aside, go on doing your job, and if they misbehave at any point of time, like they say in Hindi, muँह तोड़ जवाब देना अच्छा है.
Definitely and absolutely, ma'am. I think the moment you said that transformative technologies should be the need of the hour, I think that clearly sums up the situation and also what happened with regards to information warfare in the recent conflict. Now, on that as well, I think psychological warfare and whatever proxy tactics Pakistan has been using, I think that also makes our bilateral relations more complex than ever before.
Right.
So, keeping that in our mind, let's now shift our focus to strategic waters. And whenever I talk about it, it's always the Himalayan river system that comes to my mind. Now, with the Brahmaputra River that is emerging as a geopolitical flashpoints with regards to China, and we see that the Indus system is continuing to be a contested domain with Pakistan. What strategic measures do you think India should adopt to safeguard its hydro security?
I would request your team to pull up a map for the viewers. The issue is like this. I will not treat the Indus Water Treaty's abeyance as an independent issue removed from the context in which we are operating vis-a-vis China and the BRB, which is the short for Brahmaputra River Basin. The Brahmaputra, in the case of Brahmaputra, I'm sure youngsters have heard these riparian states, upper riparian states and lower riparian states. The Brahmaputra, as you can see from the map, flows from Tibet. Tibet is home to nearly 100 freshwater rivers originating from its land. It's a blessed land, which China has taken away. I wish it was an independent country, but China is ambitious and it couldn't leave Tibet to fend for itself. So from Tibet, it goes to China, and from China, it goes to Assam, northeast region of India, and then it flows into Bangladesh and then moves down to merge with the oceanic waters, the Bay of Bengal. Now, when it crosses so many countries, it is geographically blessed to be an upper riparian country. I'll take 2 minutes about BRB and India-China relations. After a long haul of suspicion and doubt, and then technology developments and the need for hydroelectricity projects, etc., 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 the Chinese and Indians have gone on to a deal in which they said from 2000 onwards, this happens in 2000 AD, from 2000 onwards, we will start looking at sharing of data as upper riparian and lower riparian countries. And that data sharing takes place 10 years, 12 years after the first agreement in 2000 or approximately thereabout. Then it has been renewed and it has been renewed as recently as in 2018. But in between, something happened. And between 2025 and 18, and before that as well, you had Depsang, you had the issue of confrontation at Dolam or Dokalam, as you wish to call it, and then Galwan happened. During these conflicts, the data sharing, which is part of the agreement between China and India, they assured us they would share hydro data with us, hydrology data about Brahmaputra. The rivers keep ebbing and flowing. That data is very important for predicting. And at one point of time, ISRO has understood that the Chinese have deliberately breached the Brahmaputra at certain points, causing floods in Himachal and Arunachal. Now, this is the background in which the Brahmaputra River Basin issue has to be understood. That China can cook up data. China has been supplying data free of cost to begin with to Bangladesh, but it charges India certain amounts towards processing fee. So Bangladesh is a friend. India is not being treated as one by China from any set of parameters. Okay, then the other issue is if the Chinese who denied that they breached the rivers in the upper riparian regions in 10 years ago or so, and ISRO data proves otherwise, so we can't trust the Chinese for their data. Even if they give after we pay them processing fee, the data should be looked at skeptically. So my advice is, unsolicited of course by Government of India, is to create your own technological capabilities through satellite technology to assess the hydrological data of the, I hope it is possible, I'm not a technology person, I hope it is possible to gauge the information through satellite technologies. So that is one thing. As far as India, China, Himalayan river water systems and Brahmaputra river basin issue is concerned. The agreement has not been renewed since 23, and we are in 2025, mid-25. So that is as far as BRB is concerned. When it comes to Indus Water Treaty, this was the benevolence of Jawaharlal Nehru that brought World Bank into the picture, and the Indus Water Treaty Agreement was signed when he was the Prime Minister of India in 1960. And the terms were stacked against India. You cannot walk out of the treaty. There is no clause or provision for that. So perennially, Pakistan is at an advantage. Then any dispute, any differences of opinion has to be supervised by a neutral agent. On several occasions in the last 50 years, 60 years, whenever we had differences, an independent neutral, so-called neutral agent was brought to the area. And the man would visit Pakistan, India, from India to Pakistan. He would move back and forth. And both the governments will host the man. And all this is not structured as part of the treaty. There is no sharing of expenses. And then while the man or the woman or whoever the expert is being hosted, the hosting itself would become so exorbitant that, it is better to leave the issue rather than look for resolution of the issue. This is the vexed response from the Indian side on several occasions. The high commissioners have been informed of respective countries, and the experts have been informed. Within the country, the bureaucracy was also having its own opinion, but then Indus Water Treaty is stacked against India. I'm glad at least now one government of India had put it in abeyance. Let the Pakistanis scream for their conduct and misbehavior in all these decades, and let Punjab and Sindh, it's a humanitarian disaster, but then at my age, I have also lost patience reading up on India-Pakistan relations. We have to be tough with them. We are the upper riparian state in this context, and Pakistan is the lower riparian state, and we need waters for our own region, Rajasthan, Gujarat, partly, Jammu and Kashmir, and the neighboring areas of the Indus River. And these places, there is, I want the viewers to be taking note of one more issue. There are several articles on Indus Water Treaty of late from the Pakistani side. And every one of them say in the negotiations, Jammu Kashmir must be called as an independent entity. While we've been on record that including POK, J&K is an integral part of India, none of the Pakistanis is in a position to register this particular statement because it is inconvenient for them. So in the case of China, they are the upper riparian state. And in the case of Pakistan, we are the upper riparian state. And they are in no position to understand. So how do we go about handling the Himalayan river waters if we want to benefit from the water sources? We have not signed, neither Pakistan nor India have signed what is called the United Nations Watercourse Commission. There is such a thing. Chinese have abstained when it was created Chinese have not signed in 97. India and Pakistan chose to abstain from the conference. And in the final voting, all the three countries did not join because it does not suit. In which case, you sit down together and then for the benefit of your economies, work out feasible solutions on the basis of equality and geographical realities. That's the only solution. Khoon ke nadi bahenge, this sloganeering will not take Pakistan anywhere. India is technologically capable of taking care of itself vis-a-vis China in BRB. I don't know about Pakistan in the case of IWT.
Definitely, ma'am. I think we must understand that these rivers not only feed millions, but they also fuel national security concerns. So,
Absolutely.
definitely, I think your point underscores the urgency of treaties or even being part of strategic dialogues, which are not only related to environmental aspect of these water bodies, but also the geographical and clearly the geopolitical aspect as well. Now, considering the looming two front war scenario with China and Pakistan, not only sharing a border but also increasingly aligning militarily, what objectives do you think India should formulate to counter this dual threat, so called, as we say? And what should be the key priorities to secure India's northern frontier, wherein we can see that there is this volatile strategic triangle that exists?
Lady, the terrain is one of the toughest. India has been specializing in high altitude mountain warfare. We have a specialized dedicated training school in our country. And this is an old information. The Americans aspire to learn from that training academy because they don't have this kind of high altitude mountain ranges in their country. They do have mountains also in Europe, but then we are unique in that. And the climate is inhuman and hostile. I'm sure your viewers have heard several stories about the Siachen Glacier. And in Siachen, there are soldiers who return with frostbitten fingers, with health hazards, but then they serve the nation. In one particular episode, I remember an ordinary foot soldier mentioning, "What makes you serve the country in this hostile nation?" He showed the flag and said, "That is my motivation." That is the commitment of the Indian Armed Forces. And I had goosebumps when I even when I'm narrating it or when I first heard it. The Pakistanis wanted to capture the heights, but then fortunately we had prior tip off, and then we put two and two together and we went there first. It's a different story how India was able to capture Sachin and then do justice to the region. But it's a hostile climate. And in that hostile climatic conditions, Indian armed forces serve the nation with absolute commitment. And the Border Roads Division has been developing the region inch by inch in the last several years, especially under the Modi ji's government. And while the Border Roads Division is doing all the developmental activities in the frontier regions, the northern neighbor and its nexus with Pakistan poses a huge challenge to us, no doubt. But me being a student of history and international relations for some years now, I foresee another deadly entry, and that of North Korea. The Chinese, I mentioned a little while ago, have not been having any battle experience in the last several decades. Now, when I hear that the North Koreans are fighting in Ukraine, I doubt whether they are all North Koreans or whether the Chinese have sent their armed forces alongside few North Koreans to get trained in battle. I I I I have this suspicion. Nobody has confirmed this to me. Nobody has. I've not raised it. I'm raising it for the first time because China is known for its duplicity, not being straightforward. So we cannot be prepared. As they say in the military, keep your powder dry. Because if it's a wet powder, then it won't blast through and you will lose the war like the Vijayanagara dynasty at the Battle of Talikot. So keep the powder dry, be prepared. Don't think that this much of military capability is enough. No, you are talking about an adversary that is ambitious and that wants its backyard, and that happens to be, unfortunately, South Asia for China. But what about us? We also want a backyard. So, South Asia is our backyard, and the Indian Ocean region is our backyard. And when we expand our backyards into all the way to the southern polar region, the Chinese are up in arms. That is what is happening. So, our strategy is to be prepared perennially and incrementally. I'm using these two terms, vertical and horizontal expansion. When you say vertical and horizontal proliferation, it's a nuclear terminology, so that's a different story. But keep expanding, enlarging perennially and incrementally from one level to the next higher level. There's no other alternative.
Absolutely, ma'am. I think that is really enriching to hear because Ladakh and Arunachal, this area, is no longer just a border issue. It's now part of a larger convergence between the countries. And as you mentioned, India's defense posture must not be equipped only in numbers, but also, as you said, in anticipation as well as in resilience. Now, let's turn to India's maritime neighborhood. In recent years, we've seen that countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and even the Maldives, they have witnessed fluctuating alignments between India and China. And we did discuss about this in the very first question as well. Now, what strategic approach should India adopt to reaffirm its influence and to build a trust which is enduring for these nations, especially when we understand that economic diplomacy and also assistance are something which are used as geopolitical tools in the current scenario?
As you rightly mentioned, we have partly covered the neighborhood in the first question itself, but to answer the current question, Number one, the ethnic commonalities and similarities. That's a huge issue. There are marriages in the cricketing fraternity, in the sports fraternity, across the boundaries. Part of the Nepalese armed forces are married to Indians, and Indians are married to Nepalese. In the film industry, there are common marriages along the boundaries. In the business community, there are marriages. The minute you have cross-country, cross-national marriages, you have some kind of an affinity and affiliation, or, when something is not right, it is either winked at or ignored deliberately, at times to the detriment of the country's national interests. An additional dimension that we need to be very careful in observation is in the Northeast, with the Myanmaris, with the Nepalese, with the Bhutanese, with the Chinese, with the Thais. With every of these countries, we have several commonalities because of the ethnic commonality. The ethnicity is an issue in the case of northeast of India. That is the case with Punjab. That is the case with Sri Lanka and Tamil Nadu, Kerala and Karnataka. That is the case with the eastern coast as well. If this is the situation, then you have to have an understanding of who is a citizen of this country and who is not, for which Citizenship Amendment Act is a must. And it has been bulldozed, and at last it is in its place. I normally give the example of, 10 people come into your house, which is a 2-room tenement, and then they lodge themselves and they sit there. And when you are eating, they extend their hands, and you have to share your frugal means with them on a day-to-day basis, not for a day or two, not for a week, but for years. You are a middle class or a lower middle class family. You are just about beginning to develop because you finished your graduation and you got a job for a paltry salary, and you are able to chip into your parents' income, and you have these 10 uninvited guests landing on your head. That is what the significance of Citizenship Amendment Act is. You have, as the Hindi term goes, Ghuspetia, insurgents, and not all of them are poor. Some of them have come with inimical intentions into this country. Some of the political parties are aware of their entry, and they are used as vote bank politics, which is another nuisance to us. And they are utilized for nefarious activities. We have seen it in the Kejriwal's government in New Delhi. We have seen it occasionally under Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal. And in Mizoram and Manipur, when the Ministry of Home Affairs wants to do something like, take note of the entrants from the neighboring countries, Mizoram is obliging. Manipur is not obliging. Sometimes, depending on the leadership, Mizoram agrees with Ministry of Home Affairs diktats. Then Manipur goes against it. There must be a coordinated action between the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Home Affairs, and the citizen register which is maintained, and at the time of elections and even otherwise, who is an Indian national and what kind of, you are also in the era of fake documentation. So it's very easy to replicate. So you are not talking about one or two issues, but a multiplicity of issues while you are handling the neighborhood and the neighbors. The ethnic similarities poses the biggest challenge in my opinion. You cannot distinguish between an Indian and a Nepali. You cannot distinguish between an Indian and a Bangladeshi. All it needs to do is put a tilak or not put a tilak, wear a scarf or not wear a head scarf. You know, it can be mimicked. It's not very difficult. So how do you distinguish? How do you safeguard yourself? Do you put a fence around? And what has the fence got to do? I can quote endless number of reports where the illegal immigrants issue. Trump is deploying national troops between American and Mexico borders. If you do anything like that, you are inhuman and you are violating human rights. Look at the Rohingyas issue that has dragged on for decades. When was 1971 and we are in 2025? So it's not an easy task to govern this country with such inimical neighborhood. Elements of those neighbors are inimical, not the entire nation itself. Let me make a correction there.
I think that is a very comprehensive take. And we must understand after listening to your answer that it's no longer enough that we rely on historical or cultural linkages. With evolution and with the geopolitical developments that are happening daily, I think new narratives must emerge because India stands in a very tricky position. Now, lastly, I would turn to a very recent and a politically sensitive development which is happening in our neighboring country, Bangladesh. Now, we
Okay.
can see that the ouster of Sheikh Hasina and the appointment of Muhammad Yunus as chief advisor. How do you think this leadership change has impacted India's security outlook? And also, is there a growing threat to the strategically vital chicken neck corridor that we see as the main linkage between India to the Northeast?
I do see a threat looming because we thought all along it's only Pakistan that has been inimical and China has displayed its true nature on several occasions. But Bangladesh has been more or less for the last 15 to 18 years consistent in its pro India approach. Not pro India, but a friendly disposition. At least you had one less to uh, count as a threat or a challenge. But there is a sudden change of events in Bangladesh. What is the significance of Bangladesh for us? See, for example, if you can cut across Bangladesh, an 1800 kilometers distance around the Bangladeshi territory to reach India's northeast would come down to 600 kilometers. When the trade goes via this route from Ashuganj to one of those townships, from Bengal to the northeast, any trade that goes from Nepal, from Bhutan via this corridor reduces the overheads by half, just like the distance. That's an economic advantage. But the minute Muhammad Yunus came into picture, now this is affected. And similarly, with Myanmar and with Thailand, you've started talking about the Kaladan multimodal uh, project, which enables road linkages to Southeast Asia. And from there, India's ASEAN Act East policy can take better shape, and trading is a possibility via road and not just by sea. There's an additional facility if the Kaladan multimodal project comes through. Similarly, India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral project. That's another connectivity that we are talking about. In the government, people are trying to revive old strategic routes that existed during British India because those fellows were good at establishing connectivity, and it had shut down because of the issue of nationalities in subsequent eras. But then we are reviving them. We want to bring prosperity to the region. But in the ambition of creating prosperity, the neighborhood's political agendas are transforming, especially that of people under Muhammad Yunus. And this man goes to China and has the audacity to declare that India's northeast can be cut off. That's what his statement in China implies, that it is not connected to sea. We are the people who can facilitate China's connectivity to sea. This is what he was telling the Chinese authorities during his trip to China, the Bangladeshi leader. Now, when a leader is, and then he's aligning with Jamaat forces inside Bangladesh, and the Bangladeshi Jamaat is aligning its forces with the Pakistani Jamaat, what more do you want? The agenda is to corner India from as many corners as possible, from as many sides as possible, from land, from air, from sea. So you need to look at all these dimensions and be prepared and take charge of the situation. The Maldivians have learned, hopefully, lessons that are lasting because of the intervention in their tourism industry after the India out sloganeering, and then Muizu came round. The minute it hurt your stomach, you're learning lessons the hard way. The Lankans have learned it the hard way. And then the Myanmaris, and India also is learning, by the way. Let me give you one more instance. In the 2021 coup in Myanmar, there is a separation of the territory. The Arakan army, the Chins, all of them have a threesome group that is controlling the boundaries with Myanmar. There is something called a case study and the similarities draw map. I don't want Indian analysts to look at, if you do this to Sri Lanka, what is wrong if Pakistan does this to you? If you do this to Taliban in Afghanistan, why are you talking to Arakan army? You don't recognize Taliban, now you want to recognize Arakan army. Now these are bad examples in my case, in my understanding of the issue. Recognizing and dealing with the Myanmarese government and with Arakan army are two independent issues. Both are Myanmaris, but then if they want secession, if they want to deal with India differently, you deal with them on a one-to-one basis. Similarly with the others. If Taliban is useful to India, forget what the world has to say. Go and meet them. Fortunately, Government of India, somebody in Government of India, hopefully the minister himself, is looking at these issues as on a one-to-one basis and not having any comparative tables and say, we did that there, why not we do this here? Whatever helps India's national interest, you do that. That should be the overarching ambition of the country, not whether there is any similarity or dissimilarity.
Definitely, ma'am. I think this brings us to a very crucial analysis. And you've rightly pointed out that changes in political leadership especially in our key neighborhood areas, would directly also influence our internal stability and
Very much.
security mechanisms.
Very much.
Now, Professor Jyotsna, thank you for your deep, thoughtful, and really very contextualized insights. I think today's conversation has taken us we started from an ancient Indian strategy, then we went to this modern realpolitik, and this definitely highlights that how this timeless wisdom continues to find relevance in today's turbulent times. And at last, I would just say that as India navigates a very turbulent regional theater, wherein we see border standoffs, we see shifting alliances, and we see very much evolving security threats, there is a need to recalibrate, to rethink, and to reassert. So, thank you for your thoughts. And to our audience, thank you for joining us on this very enlightening journey. Stay
Thank you
engaged.
very much for having me with your team.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.